Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. On behalf of myself and Carol and Jess and the remainder of the Startup Grind Isle of Man team, we're delighted to have you all here this evening. Just a few personal words from me, really. I'd just like to say how important and how incredible Continent 8 have been to the Isle of Man's entrepreneurial ecosystem, from going back to 2016 when they sponsored the Bridge Angel Network, and then when Alex and I founded and Startup Grind 5 years ago. It's really been amazing for us. I just tracked back and we've done 37 events in person on the Isle of Man and online as well, collaborating with other jurisdictions like Gibraltar during COVID, and that wouldn't have been possible without Continent 8, and especially a big thank you to all the Isle of Man Continent 8 team, many of you who are here this evening. It's great to have you all. So we're great to have Stephen here as well this evening, who's going to be our host tonight, and he's going to be chatting to Michael. So I think we're all in for a treat, and we're really excited. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Stephen.
Thank you, Katie. Evening, everyone. So I have been fortunate enough to know Michael for about 15 years now. Michael's been a boss, a colleague, a mentor, and ultimately a friend. And so when I got the call to ask if I would do this tonight, it was a very, very easy yes. I've learned a huge amount from Michael in terms of entrepreneurship, leadership, and how to run a business well. And so I think we're all in for a treat tonight. So let's start, Michael, at the very, very beginning. So before Continent 8, before your move to the Isle of Man, how did your career start? What gave you the entrepreneur glint in your eye that you still have today?
Thank you, Stephen. I've really wanted to have this sort of discourse because, as Stephen says, he's a friend, he's a colleague, and that's really, I think, the elements of why I've been successful and why I'm still here. The Isle of Man is very similar to where I grew up in southern Quebec, literally on the US border, where half of the town would go to the hospital on the US side of the border and become Americans just by that, because it was close. The other half would be born in the hospital on the Canadian side. But I always grew up in a place in a part of Quebec that was very, very similar to the Isle of Man. It was where, in the early 1800s, a lot of Scottish, Irish, and English settled in that little triangle in Quebec. So it was, when I came to the Isle of Man, and I'll jump back to how I started, it felt like coming back in time to a place that was really where I grew up. It felt very similar, where it's people know each other, people care about each other, people don't recognize the values that exist, and you don't have to run away to the big city. You can bloom where you're planted, and that's really the theme of my life, I think, has been you bloom where you're planted. When did I become entrepreneurial? Probably when I was 8 years old, on a newspaper route where I'd go and pick up people's mail and the newspaper that would come in the afternoons, go up to the post office and pick people's mail up, probably about 10 or 12 customers. My first transaction was not to start that business myself. It was my cousin who lived next door to me, two sisters, my mother and her sister. We lived back to back. And she had actually organized this she was a real organizer, for her son. And then he didn't want to do it anymore. And so I said, okay, I'll buy the business from him. And I still remember back in the middle 60s, I was 8 years old and I negotiated, I thought it was a big deal, $3.50 Canadian to buy his mail route, we called it. And who did I get a call from? His mother, my aunt. What? You bought his route? Yeah. And she was so peeved that I had done my first deal. Little did I know it was just something that was in me to do that. And then a grass cutting business, and then all little things that I think were just natural to me. It wasn't because I was, driven by some great desire to make a lot of money. It's never been that way for me. It was just something that was creative and entertaining for me to do. So that's when it started. There's a bunch of things in between that I won't bore you with, but I think I've always had a certain nature to be able to be active, be independent, and self-sufficient in some ways. It was never driven by, a lot of people you meet along in businesses. I want to make a lot of money. I want to have a lot of notoriety, or people look at me. I've never been that way, and that's another reason why I like the Isle of Man. People are real here, and so much of the world today is not, and you see that in the business world. No, it's
so once you'd finished cutting everyone's grass and the whole neighbourhood was looking amazing, how did the career start? What was your first kind of real job?
My first real job. Was as a student in the summer times, picking rocks and at the local golf club, which was. As I said, we came from a little town, and the community decided to build a little golf course. That's where I was always worked in a grocery store, so I was always working and going to school. I did quite well in school, not because I was driving for any. I had no real plan. We lived in a small little community, so we didn't really have we weren't in the middle of the States. We weren't. We were a minority within a minority in Quebec, dominated by the politics of Quebec at the time, as well as we grew up. So my first real job actually was driven by a very practical decision when I graduated from high school, and I had gone to high school on the U.S. side of the border, crossing the border every day. That's how close we were to. Literally, I was a mile away from the U.S. border, and another era where you knew people at the border. You didn't even stop. You'd just wave, and they'd say, "How are you doing?" So I did quite well in school, and and this is in life where you never know where things are going to turn out. I was accepted to go to a pretty prominent school in the States, but the American calendar year for the universities was it would finish much later than the Canadian schools. So the Canadian schools would get out a month earlier, and I hate saying this because I don't want to feel like I'm and you look at things going backwards and you say, what if you had done this? So I was accepted to go to school, to go to Harvard. And who would have been my classmate? Bill Gates, because we're the same age. In fact, we're born on the same day. And instead, I got this job working in the Canadian Customs as a border guard, because they would hire on the border students that were from the area, because most of your parents or relatives worked as customs guards. It was a great paying job, but the Canadian schools ended a month earlier, and so you'd have to start. So I couldn't afford, even with a bit of help from scholarships, to go to Harvard. So I ended up going to McGill in Montreal, taking this customs job, and I came out of school with no debt, and I came out of school. I could have stayed in school forever. I was a perennial student, and I had a really broad liberal arts education, studied the sciences, history, economics, and didn't know what I wanted to do except maybe teach at a university, or I ended up teaching high school for 2 years, and still not knowing what I wanted to do. But in the meantime, there's some other things that I was doing on the side. I was young, and eventually I met someone at school, ended up marrying, then, but only after her father, who said, "You're marrying this perennial student. Let him get a real job." And he was an accountant, and I'd never thought about being an accountant. It was the last thing that I ever thought of doing. I was sort of left-leaning and quite radical, and was involved in politics, Quebec politics, going back to English rights. If you know anything about the Quebec environment, there's always been a battle between Quebec separating and the rights of the minorities. So I ended up getting married quite young, and my wife's father said, "Well, why don't you go and take an accounting class?" And I said, "Well, I know I'm not going to teach." So I went, while I was teaching my second year, I went back to McGill and actually went into the engineering school, because at that time there was a thing called systems engineering that I said, that might be very interesting. So that was basically an IT approach, but at the same time I took this accounting class, did quite well at it, and I said, you know what, it's going to be quicker for me to do this. He was a great mentor, and so I got an accounting degree. That led me to saying, okay, I've been in business environments. Accounting is the language of business. I ended up then, again, it's not completely planned, and it's a bit of a meandering story, but you can't plan everything. You have to have the ability to recognize when there's an opportunity and seize it. If you overplan, it's difficult to recognize when opportunities come along, and that was sort of the basis of how I then got into business. And where I chose to work at an accounting firm was a side story, but it was very important in my future plans. And again, you don't know. I didn't plan to go this direction, but from staying in Quebec rather than going to the States, it took my life on a different journey and blooming where I was planted.
So from school to accountancy, at what point does constant A come into the equation?
Okay. I said I was very involved in politics locally. There's a bunch of stuff that happened. And I don't want to tell my whole life story exactly, because that's not really...
We haven't got time for that.
No, exactly. Skip ahead a little bit. I get this job at this accounting firm, and there was a chap who lived in my little town who was a senior partner, who was actually English, but was a senior partner in, at that time, what was Coopers & Lybrand. And he said, Michael, why don't you come work at Coopers & Lybrand? And I knew I was not wanting to be in accounting for a long time. I just wanted to get the accreditation, which I eventually did. I wanted to work in an entrepreneurial firm in Montreal at that time. Probably one of the largest firms in Canada, was a very successful Jewish firm. And I'm this Irish Catholic kid who had never met anybody Jewish in my life, living in this small town. But I have a last name, Tobin, where, anyway, I took this summer job working for them just to try it out. It was a very successful firm. I think I got the job because, number one, I think at first they thought I was Jewish, but then they found out that, and they always hire somebody, and all the Jewish kids in Montreal, most of them, when I studied, were in accounting, I became friends with a lot of the Jewish kids. It was very entrepreneurially based. A lot of clients that they were a large firm. I learned an awful lot there. Could have stayed there, made a career there, but in one of the clients that we had, and this dates me, I was an early techie within the company. Not many people here will remember the spreadsheet program VisiCalc. It was the precursor to Lotus 1, 2, 3. and then Lotus 1, 2, 3 became Excel. I was like the VisiCalc expert and then the Lotus expert. So I was involved in a lot of, accountants really made the personal computer relevant because you could use it for cash flows and stuff. And so I was that expert. So I ended up meeting a guy named Michael Copeland to do some consulting for him. Michael was so my expertise in the accounting firm was quote unquote techie companies and real estate. Michael Copeland is the Copeland, all of you are familiar with Mitel, the phone system. Chris would know that very well. Well, Michael was the Intel. Michael Copeland and Terry Matthews were bought by British Telecom back in the middle 80s for, at that time, couple billion dollars. Michael went off and started Corel, Copeland Research Laboratory. Terry went off and started Newbridge. Well, anyway, when Michael started Corel, I ended up doing consulting for him. And that's what sparked me to say, you know what, there's more than being just an accountant. And I went off and opened up my own practice in combination with a couple of ventures that I started then. It was also the age of the factory outlet center. I was born on the border where a lot of people were doing cross-border shopping. With a partner, we ended up building outlet centers on the US side of the border where Canadian shoppers would come down. And we also, with Michael, I consulted for him for about a year and a half. He wanted me to stay and work for him. Corel eventually became this company. They bought WordPerfect and they went public, and I always look back and I said, geez, if I'd done that, that was the second stage for me where what if I'd done this. But instead I did my own little ventures. And politics, while we were raising a young family, we had then decided to move just across the border into the States, at the closest American city, where the North American Free Trade Agreement had been signed, and to get my Canadian Chartered Accountancy, to get my US accreditation, I had to work in the States for a year. Went to a small firm there, and ended up getting involved in local politics. I was on the founding of the first economic development corporation they had there. I'm jumping ahead a little bit here. When politics, being what it is, was happening in Quebec, Quebec was having a referendum to separate from Canada in 1995, and that was traumatic for our region because it was very close in the election. At the same time, in New York State, a chap named George Pataki was running against Mario Cuomo for governor, and where we were living on the U.S. side of the border, where, as I said, I went to school, so we had friends on both sides of the border. I ended up being asked to open up offices for New York on a contract. I'd moved over to the States, started my own accounting practice and consulting. So I opened up New York State's economic development offices in Montreal, to attract Quebec businesses that were saying, if Quebec's going to separate, we better be out of here. And so I was combining my love of politics with entrepreneurship. And in that capacity, Pataki got elected. And as Americans said, the two most surprised people when he got elected were George Pataki, and he beat Mario Cuomo, who had been the governor. So I was used basically as New York's agent there, but for me personally, my concept was I don't want to steal business from my home territory into New York State. I looked at regional economics, and there was a book that I'd read by a McKinsey consultant it was called The Death of the Nation State. And that really influenced my thinking of how I was going to approach that engagement that I had as New York's representative. We had offices looking at the territory. The death of the nation state was looking at regional economics and regional economies without nation states. And the U.S. was divided into regions through a transportation bill that a local congressman had sponsored. And this area that we lived in New York, from Montreal to Albany, was known as Montreal South. It was a trade corridor that was being defined. It didn't matter about boundaries, but where economic activity was. And so in that capacity, I said, this was traditional. The Iroquois Confederacy in this particular region was where the Mohawks were. So in my role in New York, I used it as a calling card to go meet people. And it was a contract, so I could do other things entrepreneurially at the same time. So I wasn't working for the government exclusively. And it was a great opportunity. I ended up meeting the Grand Chief of the Canadian Mohawks, who came to me. Well, I met him. I used my card and said, "Who are you? What do you want?" But we became good friends. And I actually proposed to them that why don't you, in your traditional territory, invest in what was part of New York State. At the same time, there was a decommissioning of military assets in the States, and major air bases in New York State, in Plattsburgh, where I was, as well as further south, the one further south in a place called Rome, New York, which was an air maintenance facility. And the Mohawks traditionally were steel workers. They still are. So having an airframe maintenance center, they were trying to privatize them. So I got the Mohawks to invest with a partner that I introduced them to in this airframe facility, and the Quebec government sponsored them, guaranteed their loans, and through that, I developed this really close relationship with the Mohawks. And
we are getting there.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I had to jump ahead. At this time, remember it's the 94, 95, 96, 97, the tech side of me was always still interested in, I had my own little PC and was learning to program, but doing the outlet centers was still part of what I was doing. When the Mohawks then invited me to say, well, can you come and help us do some economic development in our community here? Their community is literally, historically, it's right across from downtown Montreal. It was all their territory at one time. And they'd never signed treaties. They were quite prominent in Canadian politics because they had just 5 years earlier taken over the bridge that goes into Montreal, one of the major bridges that crosses their territory, and in sympathy to a neighboring Mohawk community, effectively being land taken from them to develop as a golf course. The Canadian Army invaded them. It was called the Oka Crisis. And the Canadian Army sent more troops to invade the Mohawk territory than they sent to Afghanistan. And but the Mohawks repelled them, and it's a whole story there. But they were known as like, don't mess with them. And so I got to know the Grand Chief very well. And so he says, can you help us do some economic development? They developed this close relationships with the government, but still they had this independent streak in them. And I said, by then I realized that some of our customers for Empire State Development, which was the New York State Economic Development Offices, were building fiber routes between Montreal and New York, and it was going through their territory because the internet, the .com boom, was beginning. And so I said, you know what, data centers here, that would be something that you guys should be looking at. The immediate reaction they had was, let's cut the fiber. And I said, are you crazy? And by then I'd become pretty close with not only the Grand Chief, but a lot of the council. And long story short, Montreal was trying to be an international financial center, along with Vancouver. Everybody tries to promote themselves as something. It was very difficult for Montreal to do this, but through the Grand Chief and his political connections, I said, what we should do is let's build something here where you have the jurisdiction to write your own laws. And there's this, internet fiber that literally has been built here by actually a New York-based company. Tap into that and build a data center. I knew nothing about data centers, but I knew about building. I knew that from a real estate point of view, data centers were going to be the real estate for the internet business. So it wasn't any big revelation that I need to do it because I know a lot about data centers. It was more about real estate and technology combining. And I went out then and went to a number of data center companies that were starting raising money. And I remember going to 3 of them, and all 3 of them saying, yeah, we'll partner with you. So it was for me, a proof that this was a site that was appropriate for a data center company to want to build. It had power. It had, again, not only the fiber lines going through it, but a third of the power that went into Montreal went through high transmission lines that went through the territory. I decided, I'm not going to partner with anybody, but the site was great. And the next thing we did, Financial Service Center, we went to the then Canadian Minister of Finance, his riding was literally across the water from the Mohawks, because the St. Lawrence River runs through Montreal, and the Mohawks were on one side of it. He was actually close to the Grand Chief, and so we met him and said, we're going to be doing this. How can we do something in the finance sector? And he says, yeah, you could do it. He eventually became Prime Minister, but the current Prime Minister that was there was also actually quite friendly to the Grand Chief and the Mohawks. He actually had a native adopted son. So they were encouraging this. And so we created by then my contacts in New York, I'd met the Chief Technology Officer of the New York Stock Exchange through my New York position. And he and I and some others, I was promoting this idea of doing something in Mohawk territory as a financial center. They came up with the idea, well, why don't we create an online stock exchange there? And we spent a lot of time creating a document and putting enabling legislation in Mohawk law to create what we called the St. Lawrence Financial Authority. So this is before there were any online stock exchanges, but it wasn't going to be stocks that we were going to sell on it. It was going to be entertainment. There was an entertainment exchange that was going to happen. And that was so that, and you couldn't do it in New York or even in Montreal at that time. They had a small Montreal Stock Exchange because there would be a lot of people that wouldn't want it to happen. But the Mohawks could create their own laws. So the idea behind it, and I ended up meeting a super agent from Los Angeles who represented a lot of actors and the like. The whole concept behind this was to securitize films or songs. So Tom Cruise is going to have a movie, rather than go out and raise money in some sort of limited partnership, securitize the next movie and sell it to the public. And you'd have to have gone through a lot of hoops and legal shenanigans to even get that acceptable outside. So that's what we did, is proposed that. Well, that got wind in the media that the Mohawks were going to create this online stock exchange, and it was going to be an onshore, offshore location. It was a bad press, which is all you need to be able to look at eyeballs. So we'd already decided to build a data center, and the Mohawks themselves built it with our help, and signed a long-term consulting agreement with them. When it was discovered that, they're going to build this online stock exchange, we started getting calls from various people. One of them, and again, this was not planned, it was a call from a lawyer, a friend of ours in Montreal, who said, I've got a client that might be interested in that data center that you're building for the Mohawks. And I said, what do they do? And they're online gambling. I said, what? And because I don't gamble, I've never bought a lottery ticket in my life. I'd never been to Las Vegas ever. And I went to Grand Chief Joe Norton, and I said, can we do this here? And they had just gone through a process where they created a gaming commission, because before the Indian gaming in the United States existed, the first site that investors wanted to build an Indian land-based casino was in Montreal. Montreal had a reputation of being a great place to go. And the community put together a gaming commission for a land-based casino and had a referendum, and it voted it down. The community of Ganawagi did not want to have a casino. And then the investors, the Malaysian investors, went to Connecticut and built the first Indian casino there. So they already had a land-based commission in place, ready to do it. So the Grand Chief said, yeah, we could entertain gaming here. We then arranged, so did a bit of research, knew that it was literally in 1998 that this all happened, that we shifted to online gaming. And I didn't know anybody in this world. In fact, how do you get to know anybody? Did a little bit of research, and there was what was known as the Interactive Gaming Council that had been formed as a trade organization in Canada by some American interests, but they located in Canada because at the time in the States, online gaming was like the land-based casino says, it'll kill our business. So we met the person who had started this trade association, and she ended up being very, very helpful. She said, you know what, I can't do it because of your background working for Pataki, who happened to be a Republican. The head of the New Jersey Division of Gaming Enforcement, who was the former Republican Speaker of the Assembly in New Jersey, who had just been passed over to run for governor, and a woman named Christy Todd Whitman became governor, Republican governor in New Jersey. So they made him now I look at it, a bit of a do-nothing job for him as the regulator. And he had just retired. So I called him up, and I said, because I knew if we built a data center for online gaming without having regulations, it would be difficult to get customers or be accepted. And because you think of gaming, you think of the Mohawks, it's my land, you're not going to do anything. You'd think that online gaming licensing from them is just going to be a charade for ne'er-do-wells coming there. So I flew down and met him. He was retiring, and basically was able to hire him. He eventually joined our board when we came here, but it was a side story. He's the guy that actually licensed Donald Trump when Trump built his casinos that eventually went bankrupt in Atlantic City.
So we're in 1998.
Yeah. You got 20 years to go. Okay.
So this is so Continent 8 is born essentially.
the concept of Continent 8 was born.
Yeah. And then, so let's take a segue to the name.
Yeah.
Tell us about the name Continent 8.
Okay. We were very successful at getting the Mohawks to regulate this. So we created a business that had all of the early casino online gaming entrepreneurs who none of them were gaming oriented. They were all internet entrepreneurs who had a great idea, and as you know, one of the early adopters established themselves here eventually. So once everybody came to us, so it wasn't that difficult to offer a product that was great technology and a legitimate regulatory body that was challenged because even though we had the former New Jersey regulator there, we really, it was new. Everybody was in the States saying, no, this can't happen. And but we were still successful at doing it. At that time, I know the Isle of Man and other smaller jurisdictions said this is something that we should be able to do in this internet age. Began their regulatory environments. So a lot of our customers said, go and find locations for us in Asia and Europe. The Continent 8 concept came to me that there's 7 continents, and the 8th continent is the world of the internet. The death of the nation state that I mentioned is communities of interest became more of a defining term to me. And so Continent 8 just sort of hit me as a concept. And so when we decided on coming to the Isle of Man, and it wasn't just, our first choice wasn't the Isle of Man at all. We looked at Guernsey, Jersey, we looked at Ireland, but because of one of our customers had established themselves here and became a very significant part of the environment here, it was through them that we said, you know, we need to be here. They introduced us to some key people in government and advisors. John Webster's here tonight. John was one of the first people that the microgaming team had, and it was a small team. There were 6 or 7 people at 69 Athol, and it became, when I came here for the first time, there's something that felt right, and that's when we established a formal entity in 2005 and called it Continent 8. And so the following year, we ended up saying this is where we're going to base ourselves, and through the help of government at that time, through John's counsel, through I met Chris Hall when we first came here. We said we're not just going to come to town and build something when there was an established telecoms company here. I think we almost did something together with Manx Telecom, and then there was another competitor here. Eventually, we ended up doing it ourselves, and ended up continued to run the Mohawk Data Center, which had become very successful. It had become really successful, successful enough that we were able to build other places. Because of the heyday of we could never do it again. I look back and people ask, well, how did you price it? The place where a lot of people were at that time was in Antigua. And we knew how much Antigua was charging for a rack. So all we did is charge that. And we were probably the most profitable little data center in the world because these iGaming guys, they want a place that had good technology with some regulations. You could fly to New York in an hour, or you could fly to London in 5.5. So it became a very popular spot. And that had nothing to do with planning it. A lot of things were just reacting to opportunities. and so that's how it grew. We came here, and
So
the idea.
So you incorporated here in 2006.
Yeah.
You've been here ever since, and
Yeah.
currently you have more than 100 locations now.
Yes, not all our own, obviously. At some, we built other locations. We went to Gibraltar and took over the communications center that had been used by the UK military and a number of different engagements, the Falklands War, Gulf War I, but it was Eisenhower's communication center during the Second World War. And we have a long-term lease working with from the now the government of Gibraltar, because they turned over the facilities to the Gibraltar government. So we're in Gibraltar, we're here, which is, and as I said, we looked at Guernsey, Alderney, but chose not to go there. And but this was really the base for us.
And so, almost 20 years here in the Isle of Man. And with all of those locations, as you say, you could have gone elsewhere. What factors led to a long-term commitment to the Isle of Man?
I think going back to what I said about feeling like it was my home, where I came from, it felt very familiar. You could literally knock on the door of decision makers. People were down to earth, yet smart, creative entrepreneurs over here. At the time, the government official that we met was the Treasury Minister, Alan Bell, who was, in my estimation, was a very forward-thinking, creative guy, and obviously eventually became the First Minister here. That was a very important, meeting, and you look ahead 20 years and you see the role of government in helping business. It's changed an awful lot, but one thing that hasn't changed is the ability to have, call it polite disruptors in government. We see that today in what's happening in, say, the U.S. environment, but I look back 20 years ago and I thank John Webster for the introduction and the leading the microgaming group for supporting, pointing us in a certain direction. But Alan Bell was a very important part. But and I'm not getting political, or I have no horses in the race at all anymore. 20 years later, but. He was an important factor in us coming here. So I think lessons learned are that some things don't change. You need to have leadership that can be creative and be politely disruptive. And so that was a big factor in us choosing here.
And just for you personally then, you've obviously painted a picture of all of those different circumstances that led to the creation of Continent 8, and then your choice on the Isle of Man, your long-term commitment to the Isle of Man. For you personally, along that journey, one of the traits that I always admired was you have a really strong sense of intuition. So the decisions that have led to those, the choices that how you've grown the business, I always saw that deep sense of intuition. For you personally, what have been the biggest challenges in building the business over those years, and how much is your own gut feel, your kind of knowing without knowing, taken part of that? Because for me, when that was a huge part of what I admired. Examples
of gut feel are coming here, and it's just a sense of. I never felt a risk going to the Mohawks. I always felt, I don't know how to describe it, but it's knowing that you could fail, but never really thinking about failing. There was just something that, to take an idea that people would think was preposterous and say, there may be something here, and not being afraid of that, and being a bit I don't want to say lucky because I don't believe luck. I believe where preparation meets opportunity is where the intuition part probably plays a bit of a role. It's hard to know. It's just a gut feeling that you have. Like I said, when I first came here, I felt really at home, and meeting key people who you could rely on. A lot of the cards just seem to happen, and it's not just here. There's other things as the business has grown that are based on that. Business changes. I believe in partnerships. As I said, when I first came here, I wanted to do something perhaps with Banks Telecom, and it just didn't happen. I had a partner that joined me in the very beginning who had been a close friend of mine. We'd gone to McGill together. We'd actually then met each other in the accounting practice, and he was bored with what he was doing, and he's an accountant, but if you'd met him, and a lot of people have met him who know me, you'd thought he was a New York State real estate developer. He's the most conservative, adventuresome person, but we had a distinct falling out because another phase of our business, besides growing in Europe and Asia, was going back to the States when the gaming industry knew that there was an opportunity, and by then, through the former director of New Jersey's Gaming Commission, a guy named Frank Catania, who was on our board, and a close friend, he said, we got to build something in Jersey. At the time, it was only New Jersey and Nevada, Las Vegas that had gaming in the States. And Chris Christie was the governor. So all of these sort of facts were important that I said, there's something here. Now my business partner says, no way do I want to do that, because we'd been sort of on the, I never thought it as, doing anything that wasn't something that made sense logically. The gaming customers that we had were all entrepreneurs.
And this is a great example of where your intuition, your gut feel brought a huge amount of success to the business. Content 8 grew considerably over the last 15, 20 years. How do you balance, as an entrepreneur, how do you balance making the growth happen, but also keeping an eye operationally? Sometimes the two don't meet. As the leader, as the creator, who wants to grow, who wants to see the business succeed, how do you balance innovation and operations?
I wish I could say there was a real organized plan. We were very fortunate to be drinking out of a fire hose in the beginning because, as I said earlier, a lot of these gaming companies, we didn't have any competition, which always helps. We had a very good product that we could charge crazy revenue. We generated a lot of revenue that we used to build. So, and we weren't taking money up because I knew this was what was going to grow something that was driving the internet. And so we were very fortunate to have had the iGaming industry find us. So jumping ahead to when the New Jersey wanted to license gaming, everybody knew that was the big opportunity. There's gold in those hills in the U.S. So we were approached, we were introduced to key people in New Jersey in the Christie administration. We were the ones that they said, if you're going to build a data center, if you're going to do online gambling in New Jersey, you have to do it in Atlantic City, and you have to have a data center there. That's a long story where you just jump in the river and start swimming. And it took us at least 3 years in order to get the law changed, in order to, and New Jersey is a different sort of location. And how do you know what to do? You knew you had to change people's minds, introduce them to the concept, compete with people who, you had to be patient. I don't know if there's anything that I can say other than just be quietly aware of the certain forces that are always going to be trying to stop you, but be confident enough that what you're doing makes sense, and eventually people say, "Yeah, that was a good idea."
Michael's been extremely humble here. Basically, the situation was that if you were to build a business case and say, "Hey, we're going to do this thing now," everything would say, "No, don't do that thing. Don't do that thing." But it was Michael's foresight that said, "Do that thing," right? And so, it didn't necessarily stack up on paper, but it was absolutely the best thing that CA did in the recent years. And so, which it's kind of the quality I'm trying to tap into there. What nuggets of advice or beliefs that you follow enable you to make those decisions with such conviction when people are saying, "Don't do that"?
I don't think anybody says don't do something, or maybe I don't hear them say don't do something. and it's you make lemonade out of lemons. I create the Mohawk story is one thing, but trust me, the Atlantic City story is a completely other. Everybody's seen Boardwalk Empire. Well, it's still alive and well in Atlantic City in a different sort of way, but they wanted something similar to the Mohawks. They wanted something. So in this venture, it's kind of like going back to the factory outlet centers that I built. A consumer wanted something, it worked, and like you knew you'd build it and they would come. And I guess that's it. Build it and they will come is something that you're pretty certain about. Gaming needed, these internet entrepreneurs who happen to choose gaming. I often will say, "Oh, it's been a successful business. How did you make it successful?" I said, "It wasn't successful. I should have chose selling books back at that time." And but the iGaming people were really forward thinking. We refused another very profitable sector of an internet industry, the adult industry. We could have retired a long time ago, and my former partner definitely was a little peeved with me when I said, "No, we're not going to do that." And then he was peeved with me when I said, "No, we're going into the States." And he says, "No way." So I ended up eventually doing it with him for a while, but then he says, "I'm not going any further forward," and I bought him out, and he's happy and living a good life. And so today, I look at that. Coming to the Isle of Man was one thing. Going back to the States and doing Atlantic City was another thing, because that started us on a path where we're involved in writing the legislation, influencing the legislation. It's and you need legislation, you need regulations. It was easy in the Isle of Man, where you had local political representatives that you could work with. Like New Jersey, you had all kinds of self-interests that didn't want it to happen, and then so it was a little more complicated and a little more costly. So it's.
So I was going to ask another couple of questions, and then we're going to open it to the floor. So there's entrepreneurs in the room. What advice would you give any entrepreneur that's looking to start a business, or is perhaps doubting themselves, or what advice would you give any budding entrepreneur really?
I think partnering is really important. I've always had a partner or partners. Sometimes I look back on the things that I've been involved in. Not all of them have been the right partner in the end, but because everybody changes, and partnering doesn't necessarily mean you have to have them an investor in your business or a participant in operations. Mentors that you need that give you confidence. The Grand Chief was not a businessman at all, but people respected him. We met through him, the Canadian premiers and prime ministers, and everybody knew him, and they left alone, even though there were challenges for them and still are for First Nations and tribal communities in North America. I think it's, again, partners, advisors that can provide you contacts, information, and again, you never, that's key to me, I think. Jumping ahead to today, it's still that way. It's talk to a lot of people, and that hunch that give everyone the benefit of the doubt, but you know who to trust. And I think that's something that I tend to trust everybody, but as you get to know someone better, you know where trust and competence and complementarity, you can forge a relationship that may not last because whatever you may be thinking about or the project you might plan, it's the way I always looked at people that would join Continent. You were a part of that. I always looked at someone who joined would be eventually a real partner. Like today, where we obviously have plans as we grow the next generation to have employee ownership. So I think everybody wants to be a part of something, whether you're a family, whether you're an organization, a community, a jurisdiction. I think getting a diverse people naturally to be a part of you, advising you. Not everyone's going to be the entrepreneur or the leader of the business, but I think partners.
So final question then. So what do you see as looking ahead, what do you see as the opportunities for the Isle of Man, and how does Constant 8 fit into that?
Well, I think it goes back to the Isle of Man today, no different than it was 20 years ago. You have to have good political leadership, and I think more so today than ever before. I think this, and I'm not as familiar, since COVID I haven't been here as much, but it's always been, it's not been a surprise to me, there's always been very creative people that choose to live here. And smart people who have had experience, who start businesses, who collaborate. I've always looked at the Isle of Man and the organizations that exist, where business people can speak with each other and partner up, no matter what. Everybody has a diversity of background, everybody knows each other. So that's partnering in some way. So obviously, not everybody participates with each other in a new business, but I think the Isle of Man undersells itself. There's a lot of people, I think, today that don't know the Isle of Man. The fact that you're not a part of the United Kingdom, I think that's interesting for a lot of entrepreneurs who look at the resources, people that are here, are government that I think could become, I don't know the current state of the government side. Any comment me about government here is I'm not knowledgeable. The players, the positions that people have. I think it's really important to have in some ways, polite disruption. There's disruption going to happen in the U.S., guaranteed, in the next 10 years. I didn't use the word polite because I don't know how polite it's going to be. But I think people are looking for change because we know there's this big wave coming. And I think, again, small jurisdictions that are based on community and history and the ability to think out of the box and take the risks that an entrepreneur has. That's the challenge of any community. Do we do something that we'd never think of doing or try to? For instance, Quebec. I grew up in Quebec, I love Quebec, we're buried in my little hometown. We have offices in Montreal as well as still managing the Mohawks Data Center. I think Quebec will probably in the next 3 to 5 years may achieve being a separate jurisdiction. Doesn't necessarily mean that that's the right thing, but the Isle of Man has the ability to probably think out of the box. And I think that comes from, and it's more achievable here to think wild things that you think that's impossible. It's as big as a lot of the Caribbean countries.
Michael's a really big fan of the island. He has a place here, and I don't see that ever changing really. So, on behalf of everyone from the island, thank you for the commitment that you've given to the island through Constant 8 and personally, because a lot of the businesses that exist here today wouldn't do if it wasn't for Constant 8. So, thank you for that.
Well, I thank the Isle of Man because obviously, as you know, lifelong friends here. I feel like COVID wasn't easy to deal with getting here. The last couple of years we've been growing significantly in the US and in Asia. But on a personal level, our core team is here in the Isle of Man. Lifelong friends are here and their colleagues. Former colleagues that they all come here, and this is great to be back now. And as soon as I know it was a stormy time to come here on Friday, but it wasn't that stormy for someone who now lives in Florida a lot. Knows what hurricanes are about. Being told that it's so cold, and reminding them I come from Canada. So it was balmy. But it was great. I went for a walk along Marine Drive on Saturday afternoon, and then went down onto Strand Street to go to the bookstore. I think I saw Miles here. I discovered after that it was your bookstore that I went to, because it wasn't W.H. Smith. I wanted to buy somebody locally. I mean, it's only a while ago. I did Christmas shopping for my grandkids. So every Isle of Man fairy tale book and so on. But no, I love it.
Okay, good. So, any questions anyone would like to ask Michael?
Hi, Michael. My name is Candy. I'm from Hong Kong originally. I'm also incidentally working at Miles's firm, learning the ropes here. Thank you for that talk. I have the distinct impression that you had a lot of opportunities through speaking to the Mohawks or having access to a lot of the top level leadership to shape the regulatory environment or change the laws. And those seem to have made a big impact on your success in your business ventures. Can you describe a little bit more of what you think, how important is that in entrepreneurs being able to navigate regulatory frameworks like that? Thank you.
I naturally lean towards libertarian and don't like regulation. I think the market should decide, but we need certain guardrails, particularly in something like gaming. I'm flying from here to there's an organization in the States, the National legislators and regulators, it's called Nichols Short acronym, and originally it was in New Orleans, and they've come out with a ideal gaming regulatory environment. I think it's important, but ideally, let's see self-regulation of industries, but we can't do that. I think regulation is something that should be light, that should be a balance between the industry, the trade organizations, self-regulation. If you just try to copy, and you see it in the States, Frank Catania's subsequent replacement, probably Dave Reebok, who ended up licensing us. So I had to go through regulations to get licensed in New Jersey. That was like a big learning experience because the land-based casinos didn't want us there because they were putting everybody in their land-based casinos as a place for their data centers. So we had to go through, I had a 500-room hotel in the United States, they could run the license that we have. So it was like heavy investigations. So it's not just that we've seen customers do it. We had to get licensed to run it as a place that nobody does the proctology exam, but the Division of Gaming Enforcement does that. Probably unnecessary in a lot of cases. I think if you can have regulation light and working with industry, whether it's gaming, whether it's the next regulated industry that needs to be there. We've also in the crypto world, AI is coming. And that's when I think places like the Isle of Man can be entrepreneurial and push the envelope a little bit and say, what? We have to do it exactly the way the US is going to do it? No, that's why I think my understanding and my relationships with First Nations and tribes, and my dialogue with them. I'm in Florida now, so I know the Seminoles very well, who are kind of the counterparts to the Mohawks. We have a very successful gaming operation. And more than that, they were the Hard Rock brand, my dialogue and discourse with them and Mohawks and others is, yeah, you felt colonized. And there's, by that, whoever it was, whether it was the British or the Europeans, don't let continent 8 be colonized by big tech, big business, big government. It's a place that you can do it. It's a place where this is an indigenous community with its history with the Vikings and then the people that are in here. So small is beautiful. And I think if you can get political decision makers, the right people to take on that position, it's a trusted position. If you have entrepreneurs in governments, so there's really a partnership between entrepreneurial and political leaders who drive things, and entrepreneurs who are empowered rather than stopped. And always you have to have oversight. There's jurisdictions all around the world. We go to conferences. We're a digital infrastructure company. That's what we are. We don't do gaming. We have a big cybersecurity business now. We've developed this global network, which is important because the locations that we're in. And so we can get on the backbone. Some of the names of these big American companies and other companies that you would know the name of, but are using this global network where we've been approached by non-aligned countries, particularly in Latin, 2 or 3, who want to jump onto our network because they don't want to be in the network or the cloud that we have. They don't want to be an American-based one or a Chinese-based. They want to be non-aligned. They want to be, I think there's a big opportunity. So come to a place like the Isle of Man, not to complicate things, and maybe take a risk. You may have the big countries say, oh, no, you can't do that. Yeah, so regulation is important, but you have to be a little bit entrepreneurial too. I don't want to create too many jobs for lawyers.
questions? Okay, amazing. So I just want to say thank you again, Stephen and Michael. Obviously a huge privilege to have you here and to hear your story. I also just wanted to thank our generous friends and sponsors of Confident 8. As Katie said, they've been instrumental in supporting Startup Grind over the last few years. Again, 1886, thank you. We've got Justin from ELS, we've got Emily from Great Minds Marketing, we have Jonathan Burton Photography, and yeah, I just hope everyone can stay. We do have some events coming up. In particular, we have a global pitch battle that's happening on January 15th, which is being participated in by over 100 different chapters. So it's really exciting for our little island to be competing with companies in much larger jurisdictions. So if you want any more details about those events, please follow us on social media or come chat to Carol, Katie, or myself. And yeah, we just hope you have an amazing evening. Enjoy your drink, catch up, and hopefully we'll see you in the new year.